Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Cam and Crank. Today we're diving into one of the most important motorcycles ever built, the 1969 Honda CB750 Four, a machine that didn't just put Honda on the global superbike map, but also changed how the world thought about motorcycles themselves. This story is about more than just specs or horsepower. It's about timing, cultural appetite, and a revolution that no one saw coming. So whether you're a long-time rider or just fascinated by machines that leave their mark on history, this is a journey worth sticking with. Back in the late 1960s, the motorcycle world was divided into two camps. You had the British twins and triples that had dominated the post-war years, and you had the exotic Italian machines that delivered speed, but at a steep cost and with equally steep reliability concerns. On the other side, Japanese manufacturers were still considered budget players, good for small commuter bikes, but not serious contenders in the heavyweight performance category. Honda had already surprised the world earlier in the decade with its wins on the racetrack, but no one expected the company to roll out something that would essentially end one era and start another. The CB750 Four was marketed not as an exotic toy for the wealthy, but as a reliable, affordable, and shockingly capable machine that ordinary riders could actually buy, ride daily, and push to speeds that used to be reserved for race paddocks. The appeal was irresistible, and it sparked a wave that would crash across the entire motorcycle industry. For today's story, we'll look at how Honda managed to pull off this unlikely feat, how the CB750's engineering and design decisions reshaped expectations, and how the bike's cultural impact turned it into a legend remembered half a century later. We'll unpack the path that led to the CB750, the reasons it was instantly hailed as the first superbike, and the way it influenced everything from rival companies to motorcycling culture in America and beyond. Think of this as a layered ride through history, innovation, and legacy, told through the lens of one extraordinary motorcycle, because when Honda introduced the CB750 Four, it wasn't just putting a new product into dealerships, it was rewriting the rulebook on what a motorcycle could be and who it could be for. By the time we're done, you'll see why collectors call it the Holy Grail, why it remains a touchstone for engineers and riders alike, and why the dream it represented is still alive today. So settle in, because this isn't just a history lesson, it's the story of how one bike reshaped freedom on two wheels and set the standard for decades to come. Honda's leap into the superbike world didn't happen by accident. It was the culmination of years of calculated moves, daring experiments, and a willingness to defy assumptions about what riders really wanted. By the late 1960s, Honda had already proven it could dominate small-capacity machines, and its reputation for reliability was unmatched. But in the American market, dominance meant building something bigger, louder, and faster. Harley-Davidson ruled the home turf, with massive V-twins, while British marques like Triumph and BSA held sway over riders who wanted sporting flair. Honda knew it couldn't just scale up a commuter bike, it had to deliver a cultural statement disguised as a machine. Micro story. In 1968, Honda's founder Soichiro Honda pushed his engineers to think beyond incremental gains. He wanted a motorcycle that would shock Western riders into paying attention. The team drew inspiration from Honda's four-cylinder racing machines, but the trick was making such performance accessible to everyday buyers. This meant solving production challenges, cutting costs without cutting corners, and designing an engine that was both thrilling and bulletproof. Context digest. Until then, the idea of a mass-produced four-cylinder motorcycle was almost unthinkable. Yes, there were racing prototypes and a few limited production Italians like the MV Agusta, but those were rarities, expensive and temperamental. The CB750 was built on an assembly line, intended for volume sales, and priced within reach of middle-class riders. This alone signaled a massive disruption. Microstory. Early testers of the CB750 were stunned by what they found. An inline-four with a single overhead camshaft that could push past 120 miles per hour, paired with a front disc brake that made stopping as impressive as going. The combination made British triples look outdated overnight and left American twins feeling like heavy cruisers rather than sporting machines. Suddenly, power and refinement lived in the same garage. Reflection bridge. The brilliance of the CB750 wasn't just its speed, but its balance of speed with usability. Microstory. Honda's marketing was equally revolutionary. Ads highlighted the electric start, the smooth ride, the reliability under high stress. Features that weren't sexy on their own, but together painted a picture of freedom without frustration. American buyers could suddenly imagine cross-country rides without worrying about roadside breakdowns, and younger riders saw themselves as part of a new era where motorcycles weren't just for rebels, but for anyone chasing adventure. Context digest. The cultural backdrop here mattered. America was coming out of the muscle car boom, Vietnam protests were reshaping youth identity, and the idea of freedom was being redefined. Into that moment stepped a motorcycle that promised both speed and dependability, a combination that resonated deeply with riders who wanted thrills, but also wanted to get to work on Monday. Microstory, rival manufacturers didn't know how to respond. Triumph and BSA scrambled to improve their triples. Kawasaki accelerated its development of the Z1, and Harley kept its focus on cruisers. None could match Honda's blend of mass production and innovation overnight. The CB750 wasn't just a product, it was a market reset, forcing everyone else to play catch-up. Reflection bridge. What began as an engineering gamble quickly became a commercial juggernaut. Context digest. By 1970, the CB750 was being hailed in magazines as the world's first superbike, a label that stuck not just because of its performance, but because it defined a new category. Here was a machine that could tour comfortably, drag race at the strip, and commute with equal ease. It became the Swiss Army knife of motorcycles, and that versatility made it a global icon. Microstory. Collectors today still hunt for the so-called sand-cast CB750s, the earliest production run where Honda used sand-casting techniques for the engine cases. These bikes symbolize the beginning of the revolution and often command sky-high prices at auctions, not because they're rare alone, but because they carry the DNA of a cultural turning point. Microstory. At dealerships across the US, the CB750 didn't sit on showroom floors for long. Riders traded in their aging British and American machines, often shocked that a Japanese bike could outperform and outlast the icons they grew up with. This shift wasn't just about technology, it was about pride, brand loyalty, and a dawning realization that the balance of power in motorcycling had changed forever. Context digest. The phrase universal Japanese motorcycle would later describe the wave of inline-four machines that followed from Honda and its rivals. But in 1969, that idea was just taking root. The CB750 planted the seed for a formula that would dominate the entire 1970s, a template copied across brands and continents. Microstory. Honda's engineers had aimed for reliability, but what they delivered was almost mythical. Stories spread of bikes starting after being left in barns for years, or surviving cross-country journeys with nothing more than oil. Changes. This wasn't just marketing, it was lived experience. And it made the CB750 more than a motorcycle. It became a trusted companion. Reflection bridge. What started as a dream on the drawing board had now become a worldwide phenomenon, reshaping the industry from the ground up. And this wave of change was only just beginning. Transition. Because while the CB750 redefined what a motorcycle could be, its ripple effects would force competitors, cultures, and even governments to rethink the role of two wheels in society, and that's where the story deepens. As the CB750 spread across continents, its impact became impossible to ignore. Riders embraced it as a gateway to a new kind of freedom, while entire industries scrambled to keep pace. What had started as Honda's ambitious project was now reshaping markets, cultures, and rival strategies in ways that went far beyond the motorcycle itself. Microstory. In the early 1970s, Kawasaki unveiled the Z1, a direct response to Honda's success. It packed even more power, aiming to steal back the spotlight. Yet instead of diminishing Honda, it confirmed that a new arms race had begun, with Japanese manufacturers setting the terms and European builders left struggling to keep up. Suddenly, the superbike class was a battlefield, and Honda had drawn the first line. Context digest. This arms race also meant that technology advanced at breakneck speed, Features like stronger braking systems, refined suspensions, and improved reliability trickled down faster than ever before. Riders benefited from competition. That would have been unthinkable without the CB750's disruptive entrance. Microstory. On the streets of America, the CB750 inspired a cultural shift. Clubs that once swore by British machines now found themselves recruiting riders on Hondas. Long-distance rallies saw growing numbers of CB750s proving their durability. Custom. Shops even began experimenting with choppers and cafe racers based on the inline-four platform, something that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. Reflection bridge. The CB750 didn't just start trends, it became the foundation on which new ones were built. Microstory. Policymakers and police departments also took note. Honda's reliability and speed made it a natural choice for highway patrol fleets in some regions, replacing heavy American cruisers. This gave the CB750 an added layer of legitimacy, showing it wasn't just for young rebels, but trusted in official service. Context digest. Globally, the CB750 fueled Honda's reputation as a leader not only in sales but in cultural cachet. In Europe, where tradition had once been king, younger riders gravitated toward the Japanese formula, creating generational tension between those clinging to British heritage and those chasing modern performance. The shift was permanent. Microstory. At the Isle of Man TT, privateers began entering CB750s, showing that mass-produced bikes could hold their own against exotic racers. While factory teams didn't immediately dominate, the symbolism was powerful. Anyone with money to buy a showroom bike could, with a few tweaks, compete on the world's toughest circuits. Reflection bridge. The democratization of performance riding was no longer theory. It was happening in real time. Microstory. In Japan, the CB750's influence was equally profound. It inspired domestic pride and set the stage for the Big Four motorcycle manufacturers to dominate the global market. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki now formed. A collective juggernaut reshaping how motorcycles were built, sold, and imagined. Context digest. For American riders, the CB750 became a benchmark for what motorcycles should feel like. Smooth, powerful, dependable. Magazines called it a do-everything machine, one that could be equally at home on a weekend canyon ride, a daily commute, or a coast-to-coast road trip. This versatility made it the go-to recommendation for both newcomers and veterans. Microstory. Collectible culture began forming around the CB750 far earlier than most mass-produced machines. Enthusiasts knew they were witnessing history, so they preserved early models, documented serial numbers, and began building communities. Around the bike, what started as practical ownership soon became a shared appreciation for being part of a cultural revolution. Microstory. Rival brands outside Japan tried bold experiments to fight back. Ducati leaned into its V-twin heritage, BMW emphasized touring sophistication, Harley doubled down on its cruiser identity, but none could outmatch the Japanese. Four-cylinder formula in sheer numbers, the CB750 had set a pattern so strong it became nearly impossible to ignore. Context digest. This period also marked the rise of the superbike shootout in motorcycle journalism, where publications pitted machines head-to-head. The CB750 often appeared as the baseline, the yardstick by which all others were measured. Winning or losing against Honda became a story in itself. Reflection bridge. With every passing year, the CB750's legend grew, not because it remained the fastest, but because it was the first to open the door for everyone else. Microstory. By the mid-1970s, Honda began evolving the line with refinements and spin-offs, but none captured the cultural lightning of the original 1969 release. Still, that first CB750 remained etched into memory, often remembered less as a single machine and more as a moment in history. Transition. And it's in the way we remember that the CB750's greatest power lies, because its legacy is not just technical or commercial, but deeply emotional, shaping how entire generations view motorcycles to this day. When we look back now, the CB750's legacy is more than a story about engineering. It's a story about identity, memory, and the way a machine can shape an entire culture. By the late 1970s and into the decades beyond, the ripple effects of Honda's bold move in 1969 had become woven into the very DNA of motorcycling worldwide. Micro-story. In collector circles, the earliest CB750s became mythic, the so-called sand-cast engines, built before Honda refined the production process, were suddenly viewed not as imperfections, but as holy artifacts. Owning one wasn't just about having a motorcycle, it was about holding a piece of the moment when the world changed. Context digest. Auction houses began reporting record bids for pristine examples, sometimes reaching six figures. An astonishing outcome for what was once a mass-produced machine. And this phenomenon reinforced the idea that the CB750 wasn't simply a bike. It was a benchmark of authenticity in the motorcycle world. Micro-story. Riders who had bought CB750s new in the 1970s often kept them for decades, and their stories passed down to younger enthusiasts. Tales of cross-country journeys without breakdowns, of friendships built around group rides, of machines that felt alive but dependable. This generational handoff turned the CB750 into a shared cultural heirloom. Reflection bridge. The emotional bonds formed with this machine far outlasted its time on showroom floors. Micro-story. Even in motorsport, the CB750's presence continued to echo. Custom builders, drag racers, and cafe enthusiasts kept reimagining the inline-four platform long after Honda moved on to newer models. Its adaptability became proof that great design doesn't expire, it evolves with those who embrace it. Context digest. Honda itself honored the legend with anniversary editions and homages, recognizing that the CB750 wasn't just a commercial success, but the foundation of its superbike lineage. Without it, later icons like the Fireblade or the RC30 wouldn't have existed in the same form. Micro-story. Pop culture sealed the myth. Magazines featured the CB750 as a symbol of the 1970s. Films showed it as the cool outsider's choice, and museums curated it as a technological pivot point. Its role wasn't just mechanical. It became visual shorthand for freedom, rebellion, and reliability rolled into one. Reflection bridge. This blending of history and symbolism ensured that the CB750 lived on, not only in garages, but in imaginations. Micro-story. By the 2000s, restoration culture surged, with parts suppliers and small workshops dedicated almost entirely to keeping CB750s alive. Forums buzzed with debates about originality, authenticity, and the right way to preserve history. What other mass-produced motorcycle could command such reverence decades later? Context digest. The broader legacy is clear. The CB750 proved that Japanese manufacturers could dominate not just in affordability, but in aspiration. It forced the world to acknowledge that innovation, reliability, and performance could exist in the same machine, accessible to ordinary riders, and that lesson still guides the industry today. Micro-story. For many modern enthusiasts, riding a well-kept CB750 isn't about sheer speed. It's about time travel, about experiencing the exact mix of sound, feel, and simplicity that shook the world in 1969. It's an encounter with history that's both mechanical and emotional, and that duality is what makes the bike unforgettable. Reflection bridge. What began as a gamble to impress Western riders became a global symbol of progress and possibility. Micro-story. And as electrification, automation, and new technologies reshape the motorcycle landscape today, the CB750 stands as a reminder that revolutions start not with following trends, but with daring to set them. The future of motorcycling may look different, but its spirit is still defined by the courage Honda displayed in 1969. Transition, which brings us full circle, because the story of the CB750 Four is not only about where motorcycling has been, but also about what it still dares to become. The story of the 1969 Honda CB750 Four is not just about a motorcycle, it's about a turning point in the way people around the world defined freedom, speed, and reliability. When Honda introduced this machine, it shattered expectations and gave ordinary riders access to performance that once belonged only to racers and the wealthy. More than 5 decades later, the CB750 continues to be remembered not simply as a product, but as a cultural icon that bridged generations. The lessons it taught the industry remain as powerful as ever: that innovation must be paired with accessibility, that performance must coexist with dependability, and that the best machines are the ones that invite riders of all kinds to dream bigger. Collectors and enthusiasts still seek out those early models, not just because of their rarity, but because of the story they carry. Every CB750 is a reminder of the day the motorcycle world shifted forever. For Honda, it marked the moment the company became more than a manufacturer. It became the leader of a global movement. For riders, it was proof that the motorcycle could be more than a niche pursuit or a fragile toy. It could be the foundation for adventure, community, and enduring legacy. Today, in a world of superbikes, touring machines, and cutting-edge technology, the DNA of the CB750 is everywhere, quietly echoing in the hum of every inline-four engine and in the promise of every affordable machine built to deliver thrills, without compromise. So as we close this journey, remember that the CB750 Four wasn't just the first superbike, it was the dream machine that made the superbike era possible. Thanks for riding with us on Cam and Crank. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.